Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'll pass the roll around in a few minutes when more people get here. I started to kind of introduce my this lecture on innovation the other day, and then we got into the other presentation, and anyway, so I kind of want to just introduce. Last week we had this interesting presentation on what causes things to happen. Harold Ennis, for example, said that new media were pulled into broad use by rising demand, not driven by rising supply. And I think that's a reasonable assertion, although it does kind of leave out, and I think a lot of the assertions that are made in this PowerPoint leave out the marketing aspect. I've obviously said from the beginning, I think from the very first day I was talking about how marketing affected all of this. In fact, I think it was the very first day when I introduced the idea that Kazakhstan did not have sliced bread yet. They don't have sliced bread yet because there is no demand for sliced bread yet. Not because there couldn't be overnight. In fact, there is sliced bread on the supermarket shelves. But it is literally only bought if somebody has a toaster, and most people don't have toasters. They haven't been sold yet on toasters. And so if they don't have a toaster, they don't buy sliced bread. And so it literally represents, I'm sure, absolutely positive, because all the smaller stores where most people buy their bread, most of the common people buy their bread, don't have sliced bread at all. It's only in the larger stores that even have it. You very rarely see anybody buy it. And so the supply is there, it's waiting there for them, but nobody buys it because nobody sold it to them. Nobody has convinced them that sliced bread is worth having. And so in the very first day I was here, I was talking about how marketing is such an important part of all of this. And I think Poe kind of ignores marketing. It kind of falls in between. It is the intermediary between supply and demand. You can create the invention, but until somebody convinces you that it's worth using, you don't use it. And so who convinces you to use it? It's a marketer. And it's again, going back to sliced bread, it was 20 years from the time they created the machine to where hardly anybody used it. And when Wonder Bread, one company, decided to really market it, they thought they could really market it. They started in 1933, right in the middle of the Great Depression, when nobody had any money. And within 3 years, over 50% of all bread sold in America was sliced bread. It took 3 years to market it adequately to where the majority of people that bought bread in America bought sliced bread. But 20 years before that, nothing happened. Nobody bought sliced bread. So that the marketing element is absolutely essential in the middle of this, between the supply and demand. And you can't ignore it. We talked a little bit more recently about how Microsoft they have products. They've had products that you can go back and watch their videos from 8 years ago, where they were showing products, surface computing, where there's children on one side of a piece of glass and children on the other side. And it's supposed to depict that the children on one side are from India and the children on the other side are from America, and they're doing computing on a piece of glass. So it's representative, but the fact is that they were doing computing on a piece of glass. They had surface computing. Surface computing is available. Who has surface computing? They've had it for 8 years. But it's my understanding, and I could be wrong in exactly what's holding it back. Part of it is maybe marketing, but also there's this intermediate step before surface computing can really be very effective. I believe basically more people have to adopt the cloud, and because it's going to have to. What's your computer? If your computing surface is a piece of glass, you have to have something smart behind it. And so either you're hooking that piece of glass up to a computer, or it's drawing, the surface that has been created on it is smart enough to receive both software and data from the cloud. So, as was said, you can invent something, and just recently I posted a bunch of predictions about the future, and I mentioned this the other day too. How in a few years, that self-driving cars won't be sold anymore. And I think it said like 3 years. Now sorry, marketing's not going to happen that fast. Now it's talking just about America, but nonetheless, there's no way that Americans have been sold on self-driving cars adequately to do away with cars that you can drive yourself in the next 3 years. Not going to happen. The marketing, I know marketing well enough, that cannot be sold. 10 years, maybe. So even though, according to their statistics, the self-driving cars have already proven that they're like 1,000 times safer than a human-driven car. So even if that's true, Americans are not going to adopt it that fast. They like having their cars. Cars are really important. In fact, you know who in America who have the fanciest cars? Usually the poorest people. The poorest people can get a car loan because a car can always be repossessed. And so some of the poorest people in America can buy the fanciest cars. And they do. They may be living in a shack, but they're going to have a fancy car. Migrants, I mentioned, I used to, my contract with Washington State was to write all these articles, over 200 articles about migrant education. So I got to know the migrant workers quite well. Plus I grew up on a farm, and we had migrant workers working for us on the farm, pulling weeds and thinning crops and stuff. So I know that population quite well, and what I just said is literally true. They might even live in their car. They're going to have a nice car. And so a car is a status symbol in America. There's no way you're going to take that car away from people without really doing either. You're going to have to market it really well to the people, and extraordinarily well to the people, or you're going to have to sell it to the government and make the government prohibit. They're going to have to actually prohibit self-driving cars. And that's possible they might do that. But that's not going to happen in 3 years either, because you also then have to market it to the politicians. And who elects politicians? All these people loving their cars. And so the politicians are not going to be elected if they go on the record of supporting a law forbidding anybody to drive a car. They have to be computer driven. So, some of the predictions, just from a marketing perspective, I looked at them and they had like 20 or 25 predictions, and some of them I just kind of laughed at. Not going to happen. Marketing will not happen in this product that fast, such as self-driving cars. So anyway, but the whole idea of innovation is an intriguing one. And then I guess this was actually trying to say just the opposite. But excuse me, no, that's wrong. But anyway, so there's some other things. It was talking about how tinkers just tinker. But I don't, again, knowing some inventors myself and having an entrepreneurial nature myself, I think that all tinkers have something in mind. And so the idea that going to the next one, that suggesting that that necessity is not the mother of invention, I don't agree with that. It may be that you're tinkering with them things and suddenly notice something, gee, this could be practical. Maybe. But I don't know why somebody would invent the wheel without having the idea that I can move stuff around easier with a wheel. I think that they're going to understand that. A few years ago, I still think I've invented, but only on paper, the best mobile device. And I invented it in 2002 or 2003 before very many mobile devices were available. But it's only on paper. But I started with the whole premise, what kind of mobile device would I need to have to get my mother to read a book on mobile? And my mom's, well, at that time she was around 80. Now she's just turned 90. So the question really was, how do I convince my mom? What kind of mobile device would convince my mom, an 80-year-old mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, to read a book on a mobile device? And so I created on paper that mobile device. And I still think it's the best one that's not on the market. But how do you get it to market? You know, it's just, it's not always, he is right to say that people can't do it by themselves very often. Although in this day and age, you go on Facebook, you're going to see a lot of interesting things pop up on Facebook. It's interesting, easy inventions. And I'd say those ones very possibly could be being done by individual inventors who figure out how to use social media to share their interesting devices, because people are sharing them. You get these very strange devices on, some of them are very simple for preparing food better or whatever, and they are viralizing through Facebook with a small native ad, and if they get some response to that native advertising, then they can self-fund it. And so there's a potential now, because of the internet, that some devices can be created and manufactured and sold by individuals, pretty much. I mean, you may have to hire a manufacturer. Like my sister created a doll, and she had it produced in China. So does China get, yeah, she depended on other people to actually manufacture the doll, and the best price she found was in China. So does that make China, you know, yes, we're all intertwined somehow. So anyway, I'm not going to go further through this PowerPoint, but I wanted to reintroduce some of the ideas that Paul was suggesting, and now go to a person who is recognized as the top expert in innovation. And he may agree to some extent and may not agree to some extent. On my PowerPoint, I put a number of links to the internet that I would challenge some of you who really want to understand this stuff to go watch the videos. It'll be an eye-opener. It'll be a life changer for you, probably, because that's the sort of impact this guy has. He's, you know, Marshall Pohl, nobody ever heard of before. Clayton Christensen, you may not have heard of before, but he's for real. He is, other people have definitely heard of him. So I'm going to go to mine, and I'm going to have to repunch it up. Okay. So Clayton Christensen is the creator of the concept of disruptive innovation. And if you haven't heard of that, then you need to do some more reading also, because that among thinkers of innovation, he is at the top of the list. And this idea, everybody's talking about disruptive innovation now. And they use now disruptive innovation is not, in fact, he himself in one of his videos apologizes for having coined this term. Somebody else said, well, why don't you just call it the Christensen principle or something? Name it after yourself. And anyway, I can't remember what his response was, but he felt like this, even though this has a negative connotation, it's not meant to be negative or positive. It's meant to be explanatory of what's happening. And it also kind of ties in with the concept we talked about before of tipping points, of how things tip, how things change dramatically. With just, you know, they kind of build and build, and I mentioned before we hit this tipping point with newspapers a little over 10 years ago when suddenly, bam, they started losing their advertising to the internet, and they all started losing money, and they're all going broke in America anyway. And my belief is that we've already just recently passed the tipping point for local TV stations in America, that they are going to, and cable in America, that they are going to follow suit. And anyway, I've written in this book I co-authored, I wrote quite extensively about that. But in each of those, we're talking about a disruptive innovation that has suddenly changed everything and has led to this tipping point. And so actually the word disrupted is now being used very commonly in people in the Silicon Valley, you know, where Google and so forth, they say, well, we're primed for being disrupted. And it's coming from this idea of disruptive innovation. So one of the speeches that I've referred you to is he's talking to Google. And he's telling Google why they're primed to be disrupted. And they need to watch out. And I mentioned the other day that because of this guy, because of Clayton Christensen, Google has lots and lots of money. It's making so much profit because its expenses are so low. It's making oodles of profit, and so it has billions and billions of dollars in banks all over the world, trying to safeguard their money because they can't invest it themselves fast enough. They have so much money, and so, but when they do invest in a new idea, they're actually spinning off an entire new corporation. Because part of what Clayton Christensen teaches is that the very thought process of an established company is anti-innovation. And consequently, that's why they become disruptible, if you would. That's why it's likely that without special care, Google could be disrupted. As big and powerful as they have become, they can be disrupted if they're not aware of this process. And so they, of all companies, have bought into Clayton Christensen's theories in order to protect themselves from being disrupted. And what I started to say is, when they spin off companies, they make them totally separate companies, where the parent company, the parent Google company, cannot influence the division or whatever, because the thinking of the current Google is is to make the most profit possible with what they have, and that is anti-innovation. Instead, that is efficiency. When you become established, your goal is to become more efficient. And actually, when you become more efficient, you become anti-innovation because you invest your money into efficiency. And that's part of what he explains in these videos. And so the very mindset of company officials is efficiency when they become established, and that sets them up to be disrupted by somebody whose mindset is innovation. And so when they spin off a company, they want the innovation mindset. Even if they go broke, they'd rather they go broke and be innovative than that they survive for a little while, but they have no promise. They can't fulfill a promise of creating a brand new revolutionary innovation because they're being conservative, they're being ruled under the mindset of an established company. So anyway, a little bit about Clayton Christensen. He has been named the world's top management thinker. He's a Harvard professor, the architect of, as I said, of this idea of disruptive innovation. And every 2 years, the universities in the UK vote on who is the top mind in America. And for 2 consecutive award sessions, so in other words, for over a 4-year period, their choice was Clayton Christensen, who was the #1 mind in the world. And they probably would do it every year, or just about, if they could. You can, here's one of the links you can go to find out more about him. In the Washington Post, it reported on this, that indeed the Oscars of Management Guru, that's this award that the UK universities put together, highlighted the top thinkers of the world, and for the second time in a row, Clayton Christensen was the thought leader in the world. His original book was at least the first one that became popularized, with the Innovators. The Innovators. No, that's the new one. That's known for. I guess that is the Innovator's Dilemma. But he has a number of lots of other books too. Again, of this award that they gave him, another author says that's the Oscar of Management Thinking, and the head of the Harvard Business School praises it. Clayton's background is himself as a consultant, a business consultant. He got his bachelor's degree from the university there. I got my bachelor's and master's degree from Young University, and then went on to Harvard and Oxford, and anyway, a bunch of universities. But in the process there, he was part of a major consulting firm and has spun off a number of successful businesses of his own and is continuing to do so. He's authored 9 books and more than 100 articles, including the first book, The Innovator's Dilemma, I talked about, was a top business, and he's won lots and lots and lots of awards. So just kind of giving you the background first. Just some of the definition of terms. Disruptive innovation describes a process by which technology enables new entrants to provide goods and services that are less expensive and more accessible, eventually replacing or disrupting well-established competitors. A successful disruptive innovation contains 3 ingredients: the enabling technology, an invention or innovation that makes a product more affordable and accessible to a wider population; innovative business model, a business model that targets new consumers, customers who previously did not buy products or services in a given market, or low-end consumers, the least profitable customers. This is most easily accomplished by new entrants since they are not locked into an existing business model. Coherent value network, a value network in which upstream or downstream suppliers, partners, distributors, and customers are each better off when the disruptive technology prospers. Anyway, so this all was created by Clayton Christensen, who is basically, this concept is one of the major concepts in Wall Street, Silicon Valley, every place that is seen as the cutting edge, they're talking Clayton Christensen. So let me, and it gets into marketing, is one reason why I brought it here, is that it does, a lot of it relates to marketing. So, for example, his consulting firm was called on by McDonald's, actually. And they asked him, they were trying to figure out how they could get more sales in their milkshake. They had all sorts of data. And they did all sorts of surveys. So what kind of questions would you put on a survey to enhance your sale of milkshakes? This seemed like a simple question, but actually he uses this a lot. This example is a lot because it represents lots of other situations. So if you were creating a survey, what would you ask? What kind of questions would you ask that would help you then sell more milkshakes? What do you think? Wake up, everybody. What questions are you going to ask to figure out how to sell more milkshakes? Obviously, you're McDonald's. If you're McDonald's, you already sell a lot of milkshakes. But you think you can sell some more. And so you've gone, you've sent your own people out. And they've gotten all sorts of data. And you have implemented all the things that your surveys have told you. Because probably all the questions you're thinking about, they thought about. And they didn't work. They ask you, how do you want them thicker? Do you want them thinner? Do you want them more syrup? What do you want from us that will convince you to buy more milkshakes? And they implemented all their data and nothing happened. And so they brought Clayton Christensen and his team in. And they reviewed the data they already had. And then they just sent somebody to watch who was buying, what time of day were they buying, were they by themselves, what were these people like? What they found by just observing was that half the milkshakes were being bought early in the morning in America. And that seemed kind of strange. You think of milkshake as being maybe a lunchtime beverage, maybe an evening, supper time beverage, but a breakfast beverage? That didn't make a lot of sense to them. And they were all being bought mostly by men, men by themselves, not driving with their family or anything, all by themselves. So they come in, buy the milkshake, go get in their car, and take off. They did not sit down to eat the milkshake. They didn't buy it with anything else. They did not buy breakfast. They came in, bought a milkshake, got in their car, and left. What do you suppose they were doing? Any ideas? It did strike them kind of funny. So they ended up having to interview a bunch of them to find out why they were buying milkshakes at that time of day, why they were getting back in their cars, where they were going, what they were thinking, in order to help McDonald's sell more milkshakes. Well, it turned out when they did finally decide, okay, we need to go in and just interview people and ask them, it was hard to actually get it from the people because the people themselves did not quite understand why they were buying a milkshake as opposed to something else. And that turned out to be the competitor, by the way. The competitor was not the Burger King milkshake. See, that's one of the problems of the media. I told you before, the media think they're competing against each other. No. They're not competing against each other because their advertising is all being stolen by Google and Facebook. They need to understand how to fight Google and Facebook, not each other. That's just the last person standing, the last person surviving on the boat in the middle of the ocean. They're fighting the wrong people. And so in a sense, that's McDonald's was trying to figure out how to compete against Burger King by asking the questions they asked. How do we make our milkshakes taste better, feel better, whatever we need to do to get you to buy more. And they had the mindset of competing against Burger King. What Christensen found out is they're not competing against Burger King for this market. It turned out that one of the questions they had to ask them to get them to open up was, what else, if you don't buy a milkshake, what else is it that you would buy to replace it with? I guess I should go back, take a step back. What they found out was all these people were commuters. There were people driving their car for at least 30 minutes someplace, or maybe an hour to work every day. Maybe they were salespeople. Maybe they were executives living in the suburbs, driving into the middle of the city, and so forth. So they were people who had to drive in the car a long time. And so they finally started saying, what is it? Well, one of the questions they asked was, what job does this milkshake do for you? Because they like to use that phrase also. What job does something do? And a milkshake was doing a job for them. They were hiring the milkshake to do a job. What was that job that they were doing? And when they couldn't answer that question, they said, well, when you tried something else to do the job, why weren't you happy with those? Why did you come back to the milkshake? What other product did you hire to do the job? They said, well, okay, I used to get donuts. But donuts, I eat them very fast. They're kind of crumbly. They have the frosting on it. My hands get dirty. Donuts aren't good. Somebody else would buy bagels while they were going on their commute. And they're kind of dry, and if you try to cut them open while you're driving with your knees on the steering wheel and put jam or cream cheese or something on it, then somebody calls you and you've got your hands all tied up, your knees are driving the car. Not a real good situation. And so some of them had tried bagels. Some of them said, well, I tried just soda, but that's gone like that. It's gone really fast. So what is it about a milkshake? Why did you hire a milkshake? Well, they make it very thick. And with a little thin straw, it takes at least 20 minutes to drink the milkshake. And so it occupies my time. It tastes good. It fills my stomach. Some things I've eaten, I feel like I'm hungry again as soon as I'm done. But the milkshake is thick and it fills my stomach. It takes a long time to do, and it gives me something to do while I'm commuting. So basically, these were all commuters trying to figure out how to spend 30 to 60 minutes driving someplace. And so their recommendations were all about, make it thicker, make it last longer. Maybe they suggested that if you want to enhance your sales, maybe with a strawberry milkshake, put some real fruit in there, not just the flavor. Put some real fruit as a pleasant surprise to the driver. Do something that makes it a little more interesting, even. But again, make it maybe even take longer to drink your milkshake. And in the process, I think he I can't remember how much he said, but something like doubled their sales of milkshakes because they asked the right question. I explained the other day that one of his original, I think his dissertation research was about the hard drives. And I mentioned that what he found was that after he went through these 3 stages of hard drive change from big to medium to small, that only 3 of the original 53 manufacturers of hard drives still existed. And the reason why they didn't exist wasn't because they didn't know how to do it. It was because they did a survey. And they surveyed their customers. They asked their customers, do you want a smaller hard drive? And their customers said, why would we want a smaller hard drive? Because you're asking about something they don't know about. You're asking them not. The right question is not, do you want a smaller hard drive? The question is, will you want a smaller hard drive? And they don't know the answer to that because nobody's marketed it to them yet. And in fact, they think whatever the smaller hard drive would enable hasn't been created yet. So at the time they were asking about the big hard drive, all you had were big desktop computers. There was no such thing as a laptop. There was no such thing as a small desktop that was portable. All you had was a desktop. So why do you need a smaller hard drive for a desktop? Nothing else had been invented yet. And so you're asking consumers to give you an answer to a question they do not have any idea. And those companies killed themselves by doing that. Because you can't ask a question about innovation, about technology, to somebody who is totally ignorant of the possibilities. And so, like I said, 50 out of 53 companies went broke because they believed their consumers. They believed their customers, which is one of the things that you're taught in business school is always mind your customers, right? Your customers are always right. No, that's the thing that Poe should have said. No, XX, customers are not always right. The customers don't know what they're talking about. And so especially when you're talking about new innovation, especially when you're talking about new technology, they don't have a clue about what they're going to want in the future. Nobody's created, in some cases, like I said, they hadn't created it yet, and they certainly haven't been exposed to it yet. They can't understand it yet. Nobody, for example, understands why would I want surface computing. Nobody's been sold on it yet. And so despite the fact that it's existed for 8 years, nobody's using it. They created one for restaurants. And again, this was at least 8 years ago. And they showed how people could look at their menu and choose, the people sitting in a restaurant, the menu would be all virtual and be on the top of your table. And so you could expand the menu and poke and, what it is you want. You could actually use your credit card and pay for it right on your table. Your surface of your table was your computer. How many restaurants do you know that use surface computing for their menu? I've never seen one. But Microsoft created it 8 years ago. But no, they haven't been able to successfully market it yet. Again, part of it may be, I don't think for something like a restaurant, I don't think you'd need the cloud to do it. They could hook that up with other computers. So even trying to identify a market, a small niche market, has been difficult for them for a really cool tinkerer created innovation that on a video it looks great. But why? Well, let me ask you, if you were a restaurant, would you want your menu on your desktop where they could click on your menu and choose what they want and pay with a credit card? In concept, it sounds kind of interesting, but you're going to probably have to explain it to people. They're going to kind of freak out the first time you ask them to do it. I think maybe now less than before, because a lot of the techniques they were using in surface computing are techniques you now use on mobile. But 8 years ago, you weren't using it on mobile. 8 years ago, the smartphones were not, and the smart tabs were not hitting. Well, I mean, they were in the market, but no, they hadn't taken off yet. People hadn't been convinced yet to buy smartphones and smart pads yet. And so at that point, when they created this and they tried to enter the niche market of restaurants to use service computing, it didn't go anyplace apparently, because I don't know any restaurants that use it. So, the amount of how much it would cost, what's really the benefit to it, is it going to confuse people, they're going to have questions, then they're going to eat on top of it. Maybe it just raises more problems than here's a menu. Or here's a menu up on the wall. Choose what you want and tell us about it. So service computing has not worked for that niche market, for which they, like I said, they tried to enter at least 8 years ago. The invention, definitely the demand is the important part, but how do you get to the demand? That's the marketing. That's the marketing between the innovation and the demand. In this case, so you can also, part of your business planning, your market study, sometimes is more complex than what you think it is. When you buy, what are you really buying? And what Christensen says is you're not buying typically the product you're buying a service. Basically, that product is doing something for you. What is it doing for you? And so that was the key to solving the problem for McDonald's. What is that milkshake doing for people? And what he found was totally different than McDonald's, with all of their experts and stuff, could find. They could not figure this out. With all their surveys, all their demographics, and all the sort of stuff they were doing, they could not figure out how to increase their milkshakes until they hired Christensen to figure out what job was it doing. What job was that milkshake doing for people? So that becomes part of marketing now. When we do our market research, we have to, first off, we need to understand several things. What job will the product or service do for people? We have to understand that people may not understand what job it will do for them, like with the small hard drive. So we have to figure that out ourselves. We're going to have to explain it to them somehow. In that case, that's a more complicated issue than a milkshake. Even though the milkshake was challenging enough for McDonald's, the small hard drive is even more challenging, because now you have to paint a picture of something that doesn't exist yet and explain why they're going to want it. And at the time he did his research in the early 1990s, there was no such thing as a laptop. And so it was just barely getting to, they had just gone through these phases until they were coming up. Well, they may have had laptops, they may have had at that point laptops, but they were not very functional. But they were just getting into the laptop era, basically. I remember in the late 1980s, I bought a computer that was, about a third the size of the typical desktop that we're still using, by the way. Our desktops are still the desktops are still the size, are still the same size they were 20 years ago, pretty much. But I bought one about a third that size and had everything put into it because of the smaller hard drive. It really didn't do me a lot of good, because I was doing some marketing demonstrations and stuff, doing seminars as part of my marketing efforts, and I was traveling through several states and stuff, and so it was easier for me to carry a small desktop than it was a large desktop, for sure, and that's what I was doing. And so that simplified it, but certainly at that point, and that was the late 1980s, that would have been the early 1990s. If there were laptops, they weren't affordable to me, let me put it that way. I was very thrilled to have the small desktop. So you have something that is, again, this kind of supports what Poe was saying, but again, you have to understand the market in between. So your innovation rate is up here, your adoption rate is down here. It takes longer to reach adoption than it does innovation, and in fact, some adoption, the very fact that it takes this much longer means some innovation will never be adopted. Because if you were going at the same rate, then eventually this has to, if all innovations were ultimately accepted, then this would have to start raising at some point. But if you extend this out to eternity, some innovations have to never be adopted, which is true. My innovation of the best smart paddish smart book, whatever it was, will probably never be accepted because I'm not marketing it. I'm not doing the right things to get it on the market. It wasn't a top priority for me. So innovation and adoption have two different trend lines, and by their very nature, some innovations are not going to be adopted, even if they're really good innovations. Just by the very nature of these trend lines, they can't all be adopted with those trend lines. I get another video that talks about this if you want to get smarter. So the idea of, always listen to your customers. Well, like I already told you about his test of the, but he has some other examples too. For example, RCA used to rule the electronic world, rule it. All TVs basically came from RCA around the world. Everybody bought RCA products. And then along came Sony. And basically they decided to stake their future on the transistor. Before that, all of the RCA products were vacuum tubes. And the vacuum tubes still produced a lot better product than the transistors. The transistors had just been invented. They were a lot smaller, which meant, like with the computer, with the smaller hard drives and stuff, you could do, you make smaller products, smaller radios, smaller TVs. And so RCA, what do you suppose they did when they saw, here's an innovation, it's not as good? They probably did a survey. What do you suppose their customers would have told them? Why would we want a transistor? It's not as good as a vacuum tube. So to them, the question was done. Their customers didn't want it. Sony said they will want it. They staked their entire company on the future, that they would be able to improve the transistor over a period of time to where people would want it. In the meanwhile, they found a market for it. And so one of the questions that was raised originally with disruptive innovation is finding the non-consumer, is what Christensen calls them, the non-consumer. The non-consumer is somebody who cannot afford the current products. Or for whatever reason, is not in the market. And so if you can find a non-consumer, or he also found the alternative to non-consumer is a very, very low-end consumer where there's very little competition. And I'll come back to that with another example. But with RCA versus Sony, it was the non-consumer. Who do you suppose the non-consumer would be for small radios that weren't as good, portable radios that weren't as good as their parents' radio in the house? Who would be the market for that, you suppose? Any ideas? You're Sony. You have this product. You can now, the parents have a really big radio with vacuum tubes in it. You can now build one like this. Who's your market? You can carry it around, put a battery in it. Who do you sell that to? Not as good a quality. Teenagers. Teenagers couldn't afford a big radio, and you can't go out with your friends with this big radio in your car. So you're going out in your car, you've got your little portable radio, you can go out park someplace, turn on your radio, do some dancing, kiss on your girlfriend, whatever. Now this is part of your social life. It had a market, non-consumer market, a market that did not have a product that suited their needs. And so the kids became the primary market for Sony. And over a period of time, then, they improved their product to where the transistor was just as good. But in the meanwhile, they also, by the way, did TVs, small portable TVs. Now, that was not so much maybe kids, but also poor people. These were a lot cheaper. They were smaller. They weren't quite as good, but at that point when they came into the market, there were still a lot of people that didn't have TVs yet. And so they found a lot of even more non-consumers of TVs. They weren't just kids, and kids didn't necessarily represent the biggest market for the small TVs either. But there were a lot of people that could not afford the big TV, and so they could afford the small one. And about that time, they were going into color, and so maybe the parents had people had a big black and white TV, but now they could afford a small color TV and try that out. So they started getting into color. So they found a non-consumer market in TV as well. And so Sony overcame RCA. That was one of the big questions when Christensen decided to get his doctorate after he'd become successful as a business person. His wife, he talked to his wife and said, now what? We've got all the money we need. Now what do we do? And the wife said, you want to teach. So now go teach. So he went to get his doctorate. And so one of the big questions to him at the very time he got into there, and why he then pursued this dissertation, was how is it that you have a monopoly, or maybe an oligopoly, but you have one or several companies that control the market. They have every advantage. They have all the money. They have all the experts. And yet along comes another upstart and overthrows them. How does that happen? And he started finding case after case after case. And so this was one of his case studies, was Sony versus RCA. RCA had all the advantages. And in fact, they had the technology. But they chose, because they had the conservative established mindset, they chose, and they listened to their customers, they chose not to pursue the transistor. And Sony became the expert in transistors and pushed them out of the market pretty much. RCA is nothing compared to Sony anymore. One of the problems is, again, the mindset is you don't want to waste resources on an unprofitable product line. So this is, again, the next example of GM and Ford versus Toyota, is that Toyota was the upstart. GM and Ford had a lock. They were the monopolies or the oligopoly, whatever, in the world. Anybody who typically bought from one of those two companies. And they had all the advantages. But Toyota figured out how to do things cheaper. New technology, newer factories. They had smart management, got their workers involved. Japan is famous for this sort of thinking. And they came into the market with a very low-end product. And basically GM and Ford said, it's not worth selling. We can't sell a product as cheap as they're selling it. So why are we wasting our resources on this cheap product? We don't care. Let them have it. It doesn't. We don't make any money off of this cheap product anyway. And so they let Toyota have the low-end market. And that was their major mistake right there. They should have, even if they had to lose money on it, they should have kept producing and pushing their low-end products to fight off Toyota. Because when they didn't, Toyota got better and better. Their original reputation was just the cheap car. That's the car for the kids. That's the car for the family who can't afford a nicer car. That's the cheap car. And that was its only sales point. That's the cheap car. But, they got pretty good at making that cheap car. And pretty soon, people realized, this cheap car has an engine that lasts for 300,000 miles. And these Ford and GM motors are dying at 150. And so pretty soon, their reputation started going up. And they started making higher-end cars. And those cars, started pushing the other lower-end products out of the way from GM and Ford. And they just went upline, 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 upline until they are competing at the highest, the highest luxury cars now. But they started at the very bottom. They found the level at which GM and Ford were not willing to fight. They did not make any money from that low end. And with their innovation, Toyota was able to make money off the low end, and GM and Ford couldn't. So they just gave up that market, basically. and said, you can have it. We don't care. We don't make any money from it. And they got disrupted by Toyota. By the way, one of the things he has found is that entire economies, entire countries go through certain cycles. So, for example, in America, we're having to import mathematicians and engineers. Kids in America don't want to be mathematicians and engineers. They want to go into journalism or something exciting. Whatever, liberal arts, something that they find more interesting. And so it is very, very difficult to find American. I mentioned the other day that this guy I met in the airplane, talking to him about computer science and where the next big thing was going to happen with computers. And he had his doctorate in computer science. And in his class in America, I think he was at University of Oregon, I can't remember for sure, but at a major American university, he was the only American in the class. Because Americans don't want to study computer science at the doctoral level. That's too hard. Whatever. Well, then one of his students got a hold of Christian and said, guess what? Japan is doomed. Japan is doomed. I said, what? Japan at the time had the second biggest economy in the world. I said, what do you mean Japan is doomed? I can't believe that. And so they went and looked at all the statistics and stuff, and they found that basically Japan is the same thing happened to them that happened to America. They got past that generation of people that were hungry to succeed and to innovate and to do something profitable for themselves and their family and their country, and now all the kids want to go into liberal arts. And they don't have any engineers and mathematicians anymore, at least not enough of them. And consequently, their innovation is ended pretty much. They're not the innovators anymore. Who are the innovators now? Think about it. Who are the innovators now? What countries represent innovation today? China's getting better at it. Yeah, I mean they stole a lot of stuff first, but they're getting very innovative too, after stealing America's technology. But also Korea. Korea is the next big deal. They're entering the market, low-end market in cars. They've got the technology, with the computers and smart tabs, smartphones and stuff. Korea has lots of engineers and mathematicians now because their economy is hungry to succeed. Their people are hungry to succeed, and they're going now. What's going to happen to them? According to the thinking is they will get prosperous, and then entire countries can be disrupted by other countries that are hungrier and more innovative, which is an interesting idea. So anyway, Christian says that even Harvard is the number one, typically seen as the number one university in the world, and he said basically Harvard is ripe to be disrupted. And his example was that, how many know anything about University of Phoenix? Ever heard of University of Phoenix? University of Phoenix is mostly online. They have small university centers where sometimes you come in and get some classes, or maybe like when you're first getting started or whatever, but almost all of it's online. And they are come down a little bit, but they were up to nearly 500,000 students, which is a lot of students. They were basically the biggest university in America. They were getting from government loans to their students. They were getting indirectly from their students something like $3 billion a year of student loans. So they were the biggest recipient of federal loan money in America. Again, that's come down just a little bit, but they came to Christensen and they said, "Could we do your lectures? Can we video record a bunch of your lectures?" And they offered him a lot of money. They thought, sounds interesting. So he went to his boss. He went to the dean of the Harvard Graduate Business School, and the dean said, "If you want to lower yourself, to be, hurt your reputation by doing something with this low-end university, whatever." So he said, "Yeah, I think I'm going to do it." And he had been been doing some research and education overall anyway, so I think that was part of his rationale for doing it, was to kind of figure out what University of Phoenix was all about and how they were applying innovation. So the University of Phoenix came in with their camera crews and stuff, went to Boston where he was teaching. Phoenix, of course, is in Arizona, if you don't know that. So they went all the way across the country, brought their equipment, brought their people, and they arranged for Christensen to do his lectures at another, not at the university, but someplace else, at a place that they could rent. And Christensen got there, and he looked out in the audience, and in the audience were all these beautiful people, literally beautiful people. And he went to the guy in charge of the production, and he said, you know, where'd you get these students? He said, oh, we hired them. You hired them? I could have brought students. No, we didn't hire students. We hired models. And so all of their students were models and paid to look excited and to look pretty and to make people who watch the videos, when you look out at the people, to be impressed also with all these beautiful people looking alert and bright and interested in what Christensen was doing. Because that psychologically does work, by the way. And so they starting off with even innovating their audience. They hired models. Then Christensen did his lectures, and a few months later they said, do you want to see your lectures? And he came back, and they had edited out all of his faux pas, all of his stammering, all of his, things you see me do. And they changed his PowerPoints to animations, and of course they had all of their beautiful students in it and stuff. And he said, I didn't know I was so good. And he asked them, well, at Harvard, they bring in a large group of people into the MBA program every year, 950 MBA students every year. And that's pretty impressive. And so he asked University of Phoenix, well, about how many people do you think will be watching my videos? He said, well, we think probably about 200,000 a year. And that's when it suddenly occurred to him. Yeah, and they told him also that they spend about, I may be off a little bit on the number, but about $100 million a year in improving their education. Not improving their teachers, but improving the way their teachers teach. And as far as he knew, Harvard spent nothing on improving their teaching. So it started occurring to him that how University of Phoenix and anybody like that were in position themselves to disrupt Harvard. And the more he looked at it, the more certain he is that Harvard is in trouble. Harvard costs so much more than Phoenix or some of these other lower end and more innovative programs, that basically somebody like GM or Ford can't afford a Harvard MBA. They're not going to pay for a Harvard MBA. You have to have a cutting-edge company that is hungry, a hungry company to pay what you need to pay to get a Harvard MBA. So you need investment bankers and stuff like that to hire a Harvard MBA and pay them what they need to be paid after they spent all this money on their degree. And in comparison, two things University of Phoenix has for. First off, they're cheaper than Harvard, although not a lot cheaper. They are quite expensive, actually, because I've looked in their program myself. They're actually not too cheap. But you can do it part-time because it's portable, because you can take your class anytime, anywhere, then you can keep working. So compare that to having to give up your job, go to Harvard, spend all your money for renting someplace to live and so forth. So your cost of your tuition is one thing. Your cost of giving up your job and etc. is another thing. So your real actual cost to going to Harvard is so much higher than going to Phoenix if they charge the same amount of tuition. Because with Phoenix, you'd have to give up your job. You can do it a little bit over a longer period of time at your own pace, at your own at your own convenience, and you can get an MBA. May not be as high a status, but it's an MBA, and it's a good MBA, and you still have Clayton Christensen, and a better Clayton Christensen, improved Clayton Christensen, because you got him on video with and with all these improvements done in the studio. So even somebody like Harvard may be disrupted. So what he was saying in all this, part of what he was saying, let me pause this just a second. And so one of the points that I was that I suggested earlier was actually what MBAs teach you are destroying some businesses. What MBAs teach you are actually destructive to businesses. For example, internal rate of return is one of the principles that he circled that is killing businesses. Because the internal rate of return is if you're trying to decide we've made some profit, how do we invest our profit? And what all the statistics will suggest is that your best return on your internal investment is with greater efficiency. Innovation cannot guarantee any return. Innovation by its very nature is risky. So innovation by its very nature is not nearly secure and cannot guarantee anywhere close to as good a return internally as investing in greater efficiency. He said that, by the way, this has an effect on entire economies. By the way, again, we can look at micro and macro. In the macro, it affects entire economies, because one thing that happened to Japan, I mentioned Japan is going down, is that their entire economy fell prey to this. Their entire economy started focusing on efficiency instead of innovation, because that's where your MBA will teach you that's where your best return is. And so if that's your best return, what are you going to do? You have these smart people that have Harvard MBAs, and they say the best return is on efficiency. But it affects economies in that what happens when you become more efficient? By its very nature, Christensen points out, efficiency means you're going to lay people off. And so if an entire economy becomes efficiency-oriented, you're going to have greater unemployment by its very nature. If it's innovation by its very nature causes hiring more people. As you create a new product line, as you market it, as you create the manufacturing for it. Anytime you innovate, you create new jobs. Anytime you create new efficiencies, you lose jobs. So it affects entire countries. So what Christensen is teaching has much bigger impact than just a single company. An entire economy, the effect of an entire economy is being seen through the eyes of this innovator, which is why, again, he's seen as #1 in the world. And so, like I said, what Harvard Business School itself is teaching its students is killing businesses. Is that the best return on your money is efficiency. Is killing economies. Because everybody's becoming efficiency oriented. But in the long run, it's innovation that keeps you #1. But it's a higher risk. And it does not give you a return in the short run. It's a longer term investment, and it's a higher risk investment. But ultimately, that's what can keep you #1. That's what would have saved RCA if they had continued to invest, and if they had started applying transistors. They would not have allowed Sony into the market. And I presume the same with GM and Ford. If they had gained you started using some of the technologies and innovations that Toyota was implementing in Japan, they maybe could have, and if they had not given up the low-end market, if they just said, we're going to keep that low-end market at any price, we're going to keep the low-end market. We're going to keep Japan out of our market. Then they could have held off Toyota. But none of that made financial sense when they did their business analysis. And so what Harvard Business School and what probably our university will be teaching students about business will kill some businesses because it works on the short run, but in the long run it allows disruption, which is why Google is doing what it's doing. As I said, when they start new innovations, they're starting brand new companies. They're saying, you're on your own. Sink or swim. We want you to think on your own. We don't want you to be influenced by people who are thinking efficiencies, thinking profit margins, all this sort of stuff. We want you to be innovative. It's a whole different mind process. So a lot of these rules, this is the one he happened to highlight, but he's gone through other things that are taught to MBA students that can be disruptive or can be detrimental, not disruptive, be detrimental to their companies because it puts them makes them vulnerable to disruption. And so, as I was saying, this is a chart that's a little bit strange, but basically the profitability metrics of efficiency innovations are always better than those of sustaining innovations. There's really, actually we'll start over here. I'll leave that. Here's the area of innovation. Disruptive innovations are always struggle to attract capital and managerial attention because they're always risky. The very nature of innovation is they come with risk. And so they have a hard time competing internally. If you have a profitable company and you're trying to get your managers to support an idea, this is risky, this is safe, and so they're going with what's more safe. So this is the brand new innovation. Then you have sustaining innovations, which are, these ones add new employees all the time. Sustaining innovations maybe add a few employees, or just kind of keep level. Because now these are innovations that just make your product a little better and so forth. So they do require some, they do make you better. That's a good thing. And they may require some new employees. And then after that, you get over here, like say, to efficiency innovations. And efficiency innovations, by their very nature, by definition, is how do we cut cost and make more money by cutting our cost. Now, when you go to efficiency, that's when you start laying people off. You figure out, how do we not need so many people? That's one of your main places where you're going to save money, is in labor. And so you're going to come up with innovation, maybe robotics, whatever. We're going to get rid of some of these people because it's more profitable to invest internally in this, whatever it is, in efficiency innovation that will cut our cost. So that's kind of the way it goes, is the least profitable, or at least, excuse me, not the least profitable, the least acceptable is a high-risk, true innovation. Where your disruptive innovation, I guess what he would call it. Disruptive innovation is always the most risky. And then the sustaining innovation, less risky, so you get some support for that. Efficiency innovation, the least risky of all, but by its very nature is going to cut your employment, it's going to not put you in a position to compete with new companies with disruptive technology. Because you're not doing this in a vacuum. And the rules that you're being taught in business school typically are as if you're doing it in a vacuum. And you're not. You have somebody else out there, this hungry new company that's now building disruptive technology. You've given up on disruptive technology because you're investing in sustaining and efficiency technology. And so you're ignoring disruptive technology while somebody else is not. Your RCA, they're Sony. Sony is building the new disruptive technology, and at some point will throw you over the edge, basically, because you're not willing to invest. You see better return in these other investments, internal investments. So again, the disruptive innovations, they create corporate and economic growth. They create jobs. They need capital. The sustaining innovation focuses on management, creates little net growth. Efficiency innovation just increases the free cash flow, eliminates jobs. In other words, you make more profits here. And one of the things they were talking about, it was not just, it was Christensen with sitting by, well, he was the creator of, one of the creators of Netscape, but now he's a major investor in Silicon Valley. I forget his name though. But I think I have him as one of those videos. Anyway, he was pointing out, right now, capital is really, really cheap. Basically, almost, in fact, most people, there's, I think they said something like $7 trillion in the world being invested in investment tools, or whatever you want to call them, investment vehicles that actually require you to pay them to invest in them. They have less than zero return, but they are seen as secure. And so, like, bonds, certain government bonds, stuff like that, actually you don't get paid anything to put your money there. But they're seen as safer or something. It doesn't even make a lot of sense, and yet, in fact, he was saying that basically in Silicon Valley there's like $50 billion a year being invested in innovation in Silicon Valley. But $7 trillion being invested in investment vehicles that require you to pay them to invest. What sense does that make? And so right now, money in the world is really, really cheap. Partly because all these big companies have so much, they're getting lots of profit and they don't know what to do with their money. And they've decided not to put in, they don't want the high risk, and so they're investing in more efficiency, more sustaining innovation, not in disruptive innovation. And so that you have cheap capital all over the place. You get for almost nothing. And so one of the things that Christensen was pointing out, this is crazy. It's bad for your government, it's bad for the government, bad for the economy, bad for the world, that we're not investing in more innovation. We have all this money sitting there doing nothing, in government bonds and stuff. They're doing nothing. Companies would be very well off right now recognizing, forgetting about all of what they're taught in business school and recognizing this is a great opportunity. We can get capital for almost nothing and we put it into some higher risk disruptive innovation, and we're getting the money for nothing, basically. He was also talking very specifically about our field of communications. And he was talking about New York Times. One thing that's happening in New York Times and why it's being disrupted is it used to be that New York Times provided all these services. That if you wanted to buy or sell a car, you put a classified ad in the New York Times. If you want to find a job, you go to the New York Times, and they have a big, long list of people, jobs put in by different companies. That's where you go. If you want to buy a home, you go to the New York Times, and you go to their classified section. People are buying and selling homes all the time through their classified section. If you wanted to help on wine, they had a big section on entertainment and so forth. Entertainment and recreation. If you want up-to-date business news, they had lots and lots of businesses. If you want to public affairs and stuff, certainly there. Keep me productive. Well, they had, it was, a primary source of information while somebody was waiting in the doctor's office or where. They'd have the New York Times there. So it was fulfilling all of these functions and making a big profit doing it. But New York Times, like all the other newspapers in America, by the way, you could say this of all the newspapers in America. This is how some of their biggest money, by the way, came from these areas. From here, the selling or buying a home, finding a job, buying or selling a car, buying or selling a computer, all this sort of stuff. In fact, I remember when I was your age, sitting in a class like this, they taught us one way that you can tell how successful a newspaper is how big their classified section is. Do you understand the term classified advertising? So those are the small ads typically in the back of the newspaper, and they are all of these things. Little help wanted, little cars for sale, and they're usually in the back section of a newspaper. Well, that's been totally disrupted to where all that advertising is being pulled out to different different areas. So Autotrader.com specializes in cars. Craigslist specializes in everything. Craigslist, in fact, the newspapers said Craigslist by itself. Craigslist is a free classified advertising thing. So you can go on and buy or sell cars or computers or anything you want on Craigslist at no cost. And so, who's not going to do that? So people have basically just abandoned the classified sections of the daily newspapers in America, or the weeklies too, as far as that goes, and they've all gone to Craigslist, Autotrader.com, Monster.com for a job, Realtor.com, all these websites. So it's not just Google and it's not just Facebook. All these other companies are stealing stuff from the traditional media too. And then you have other stuff, TV, of course, the big Bloomberg is stealing, doing a better job in business news. The Economist is, taking some of their readers. The Metro newspaper taking the smaller format. So the New York Times locally is a broadsheet. They have smaller tabloid-sized newspapers locally, so it's easier if you're going to be sitting in a train or something to take a tabloid than the broadsheet New York Times. They have competitors all over the place, and so they might think of themselves competing against them also, but basically they tend to think of themselves competing against the New York Post, the big traditional products, Wall Street Journal. But most of their advertising, most of their profitability has been stolen by these online companies. That's who they're really competing against, and they are failing. That they don't know how to compete against them. Because they have a totally different paradigm. As I said, with Craigslist, you don't pay a thing to buy or sell. Nothing. They have other advertising on there so they make their profit off of other advertising, because they did kind of the same idea of Facebook. If you remember the movie, he was told, don't worry about the profitability right now. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about the advertising now. We build the audience. We'll be very profitable. And so his advisor at the time convinced him not to worry about the money, not to worry about the profitability, not to worry about advertising. That will come. Just worry about the audience. And so they focused on the audience, and that's in essence what Craigslist did. They focused on the audience, and they've stolen most of the classified advertising in America. And there's a lot of it around the world too. They're selling to. So, and they make theirs off of advertising. So their profitability, because they have a very low cost operation. They're just running a website, and they have it all automated. So people come in, they say, okay, I want to sell this car. They put in the information. It goes in automatically. They have very few people running the operation, and so they can make oodles of profit off of advertising. They don't have to make money off of the classifieds themselves. So it changes the whole dynamics, the whole paradigm that the New York Times can't deal with. They're lost because they have a very expensive operation. They don't know how to deal with it. They found other things, the same thing happening with banks. So it's not just the printed media, but banks, the same sort of thing has happened. It used to be that banks provided all these things. Growth loans, personal loans, credit cards, mortgages, managed investments, student loans, payments, checking, savings, small business loans. And then, I don't have all the details here in the next one. I had to take it off of video. But basically you have a similar set of people. You have a lot of the, like Cabbage is an online, it's cabbage.com, I guess. PayPal is online. Most of these are either online services, or there's also some services where you just walk in a small, and get a payroll loan where you basically you sign over the right to your next paycheck. They check with the company agrees to pay you the money instead of them, and they give you money a week before you got paid because they know you're going to get paid and they're going to get your paycheck, and things like that a bank isn't going to do. So, there's all these other competitors, some online, some not online, but they're taking bites out of these big companies and gradually destroying them. And again, it takes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because this is more emphasizes banking. But the idea is that in the past, anyway, all this back end stuff was going on that they could really focus on the customer. They had all these different banking services they could provide, and they have the stuff you can't see was costing a lot of money. They provided lots and lots of different banking services. They could, but there was kind of a disruption here between the customer and the banking services. They were the customers did not see that they were dependent on the bank for these things. And so now that these other companies have come on, like Cabbage, for example, they can go quickly to Cabbage and within 24 hours find out whether they can get a loan to start their new business. Well, that's not going to happen in the traditional bank. And once they get that loan from Cabbage, they're going to be dependent on Cabbage. A lot of the new ideas with the online service, let's say I use a survey company called SurveyMonkey. Some of you may be aware of SurveyMonkey. Well, I have paid for months and months where I never used their service because all my data is on SurveyMonkey. I did a lot of surveys for a period of time. My data is sitting there in their service, and every month I pay them $25, and I do nothing. I'm not doing surveys right now. So I probably paid him for the last year without doing any surveys. Maybe not quite that long, but about a year. And the year before that, a little bit of surveys, not very much. 3 years ago, lots of surveys. And so I bought my service with them when I was doing lots of surveys. It was a really good deal, and I paid them hundreds of dollars since then for doing nothing. And in essence, that's what they're saying here, is that with these new independent interfaces, with all these different companies, they're finding more dedication here. More of an interdependence. Here there was not interdependence. They didn't feel, maybe they did actually before. Before these existed, there was maybe some feeling of interdependence before these existed. But now there is no interdependence. There is interdependence between the banking services and the back end, and so they have this requires greater expenses that they have to cover. And yet they don't have the same interdependence with their customers. Back here, these people are online services. They don't have an interdependent relationship with the big banks and stuff. They take whoever they want. They can borrow some money here or there. They can get the money they need to loan to these from a variety of different sources. So they're not dependent on any one source back here. They go with the cheapest one they can get. And so they can be more selective in the back end, but back here, they create an interdependent source. So this is interdependent, that, get the cheapest they can. Up here, they are very tied into a banking system they can't get out of. And now their interface with their customer has been disrupted. It's no longer interdependent. They don't need each other. At least these people don't need them anymore. These people can come down here now. So so basically that's and that is, it may not seem like a nutshell to you, but it is basically a nutshell of what Clayton Christensen teaches. There's a lot more that you would enjoy if you go to his videos or to his book, even better still. So how does that relate to what we've been talking about? First off, I don't necessarily buy Poe's idea that all innovations are just tinkerers. I don't agree with that. Again, from my experience, the tinkerers very much have the market in mind. They may not know how to get there. Like I don't know how to get there with my mobile device. And maybe part of it hasn't been my priority to get there. I happened to be at a camp with a son, and I didn't have a lot to do, and so I spent a lot of time creating on paper this device and thinking about my 80-year-old mom. But since then, I've had other things to do, other innovations to focus on, and so forth. But, I think back, as I said, I'm still convinced it would be the best product in the market now after years of mobile devices being developed. At the time, in 2003, there were hardly any, the mobile devices were actually not capable, really probably sustaining a product like that, or supporting a product like that. But, so they came, we really hit the market almost 10 years after, I was doing my innovation. But, anyway, so some of the principles, again, part of it is the marketing. But the marketing is also about economics. I mentioned that also before. A product, you have to figure out with an innovation how to make it profitable. And so, do the tinkerers think about it? I think they think about it. In some cases, like sliced bread, the tinkerer maybe he himself is not convinced that everybody needs to buy sliced bread. Because even now, ask yourself, is sliced bread an essential? Unless you're using a toaster, what is the point of sliced bread? Is it really worth paying twice as much for a loaf of bread that you could cut yourself? The truth is probably not. Is it that big a deal to slice a piece of bread? Somewhere along the line, they convinced us that it made sense to buy only sliced bread. And the efficiencies of cutting that bread became greater and greater as they became more profitable. Now the difference, in fact, I think now if you buy bread that is not sliced, it'll cost more than sliced bread, which is one of the ironic aspects of it. There's lots of things that are actually less complicated to make, like brown sugar. What's brown sugar? Brown sugar is less refined sugar. But brown sugar costs more than refined sugar. Brown sugar costs more than white sugar. Why? Because everybody's buying white sugar, and the efficiency of making the white sugar is so much greater that it's now less expensive to make white sugar than brown sugar, although brown sugar is less refined sugar. Same thing with bread now. It actually costs you more to buy unsliced bread than sliced bread now, because they've set up the efficiencies to where slicing the bread it costs almost nothing. And the market is so much, you're making so much money off of bread, that for you to bring a non-sliced product to market, and you're not going to sell as many loaves, because nobody wants, you have to have kind of a specialized product. Like in America, they sometimes have French bread where they have put inside, they have a long loaf, and they kind of cut it down the middle and put butter and garlic in the middle. And so it's a specialized product. And you pay, I think, at least 5 times as much for that unsliced bread as you do for sliced bread, although it has a little butter and garlic in it. So nobody wants unsliced bread anymore, so it costs more than sliced bread. So you're dealing with market efficiencies that kind of boggle the mind sometimes. It doesn't make any sense that you have to pay more for something that costs less in theory to make, like less refined sugar should cost less to make because it's less refined. But no, not very many people buy brown sugar. And so brown sugar is more expensive than white sugar, although it's less refined. So you have to consider in the efficiencies, the economics, the marketing, all becomes part of this path that we've been following and looking at the growth of media and the change of media. All of that stuff was involved with it and continues to be involved with it. Where do we go in the future will involve the marketing and the economics. So when you say, when Poe says you need to kind of, the demand has to be built before the supply is built, yeah, that's true. But then how are you going to build the demand? You have to have the availability of it. And then part of your expense actually is that when you're building one at a time, you don't have the efficiencies. If you can build 1 million at a time, you have much different efficiencies. And so now you build the demand, now your efficiency becomes so much greater that your product cost, I mean, we've all bought some new product. If you buy the latest and greatest new electronic product, you're going to pay a lot more than if you wait 2 years to buy the same product. Because now the efficiencies are up, they've taken their profit, and now they're off to a new innovation, so they're just taking what they can from the old product and they're going on to the new product that they're going to charge more for. Because they can. Because they find that there's the early adopters are willing to pay more to have the best and coolest stuff. So they pay more. The other people wait a little bit longer. They're convinced, okay, now that's low enough, I'll go ahead and buy the cool stuff, a year later or whatever. So I think it's much more complicated than what Poe has described it to be, I guess, is what I would conclude. It doesn't include all the business aspects of it. But I would definitely say that I definitely disagree with the idea that necessity is not the mother of innovation. I disagree with that a lot. Growing up on a farm where my dad was always having to innovate to fix something or other, and for my own innovations, it's always with something in mind that where you could make some money, do something wonderful, whatever. Although, on the other hand, the argument for is I've spent years working on web pages that I've never commercialized. Why did I tinker with those web pages? Well, I'm a tinkerer. That's true. I do see long-range possibility when I finally decide to retire to go into business on my own, or maybe while I'm teaching to actually try to commercialize one of the many web pages I've created. I'm still taking time. I'm in communication with a colleague in the Ukraine that could help me commercialize a product I've been working on. So it's not like I've totally abandoned them. And my idea was, from the beginning, was to commercialize. But I did the work not expecting to be any immediate return. So I was a tinkerer, that's true. Years of tinkering. But also part of the tinkering was my learning process, as I wanted to learn how to do this stuff. And so, for example, the learning management system we use here, it's called Moodle. I started using Moodle like 14 years ago or something, when almost nobody else was using Moodle, because I was a tinkerer. But I had in mind maybe launching an online educational business, and I had other people that were working with me on it. We were building some English curriculum on it, English as a foreign language curriculum, and we were working on that. It just, with our lack of finance, lack of time, it didn't come to fruition at that time. But meanwhile, I was learning how to do online video. I started experimenting. I found out on my Moodle site that that if I tried to upload, and I don't think they totally understand it here yet, I'm trying to teach my colleagues here, if I upload a video to the server that holds Moodle, it takes a long time to upload and a long time for you to download and watch it. But if I upload it to YouTube, and I take their embed code that they offer you easily and put that into the Moodle, I use their embedding process. Now the video it loads to YouTube faster than to our local server. And more important to you is that you can watch it immediately. You go to one of the videos I put on our Moodle site, and it comes up immediately because it's not dependent on our bandwidth with our server. It's dependent on YouTube bandwidth. It's dependent on YouTube's expertise in video, that by embedding instead of uploading, I put like 5,000 videos onto my Moodle site and found that it did not log down my Moodle at all, because I'm not using my server for that video. I'm using YouTube's video for my server. So I did a lot of experimentation along the way, and so it was a benefit to me as an academic. So it was kind of research, kind of, market motivated. It gets complicated. Yes, tinkerers are tinkerers, but I think tinkerers always want to be paid for their tinkering. And they always have that in mind someplace, that someday this is going to make me some money, even if they spend years and years tinkering, because they love to tinker. Yeah, there's that part of it too. So it just gets complicated, very complicated. And then how to figure out how to market it, how to make it profitable, how to commercialize it, how to market it, all that stuff. And you get a lot of tinkerers that just don't know how to do that or don't want to invest the time into doing it. That's why one of the things that I like to point out is some of the richest people in the world aren't really that innovative. Because if they were real innovators, they probably would have given up on their idea sooner. For example, Walmart is the biggest department store in the world, most profitable department store in the world. It's focused mostly in America, but going to other countries too. But Walmart was created in Arkansas, close to someplace where I owned a newspaper for a while. In fact, I distributed my newspaper in Bentonville, where they were created. But old man Walton worked on that with just a local hardware store for decades, and gradually was adding more stuff to it, more stuff to it. And now, if you go to a Walmart department store, it's huge. It's like an entire mall all by itself. It's one store. You buy groceries there, clothes there, auto parts there, get your car lubed and oil changed. There's a pharmacy in the building. Everything's there, all under one company. And they just built. So he started doing that in his little small city in Arkansas, adding more stuff, until finally, somebody suggested, maybe you should start some more stores. But he was decades into his little hardware store before somebody convinced him to branch out. A true innovator isn't going to run a little store in their hometown for decades. Their mindset is not made for that. It really takes somebody less innovative to have a few good ideas and stick with them. And I think most particularly before this technology period, before the age of the internet, I'm convinced it's true that most rich people were not that innovative. They had like one good innovation, two good innovations, and then they just went from there. This day and age is a little different because of how quickly innovations are entering and leaving the market, how many innovations we have. And then you start looking at people like, that created Google and created Facebook and created some of these. And some of them, well, I don't know, even then, when you look at Facebook, we were talking about this the other day, why was it created? Was it figure out who to date, some guy trying to figure out how to hook up with girls. And so, he had a little different profit in mind than making money, but it happened to take off. So, he had a different profit margin in mind at the time when he tinkered with that. No, I don't know. It gets complicated. But in all that complication, I think I do strongly advise that you get into some of Christensen's stuff, and the easiest way is in YouTube videos if you don't want to read his book. If you're not a strong reader, he has you just look up Clay Christensen and you'll find probably hundreds of videos. some that he created, some that other people created off of his, combined, and so forth. But he is, like I said, probably the #1 thinker in the world right now in the area of disruptive theory and how it is developed, how it spreads, how it overcomes, how, like I say, disruptive innovation can overcome the monopolistic companies. And it's he tried to help newspapers. The newspaper, there's a newspaper organization that hired him to help them, but they didn't spend very much money on him, so they help us a little bit. And he did give them, he taught them some of this stuff. He went to them like 10 years ago, a long time ago, when they were first being disrupted, and he told them, he taught them things like, find the non-consumers, and a lot of the newspapers found, started some products that were for non-consumers. One of them, for example, was focused on working moms, how to make life easier for working moms. And so they found a kind of a non-consumer and built a website around the working moms. Others, had other innovations that they felt were for non-consumers, people that didn't have, who needed a tool, who would hire a new tool. But in all of those, they were really still competing against each other. They're still competing, maybe finding some new revenue sources, but during this whole last 10 years, as we saw, they've lost 2/3 of their advertising, despite having some instruction by Christensen, and they've lost a lot of their readership along this line. And at the same time, they have not hardly increased at all with their online product, which I've gone through before. Their online, they were, what I say, in the entire American newspaper industry, they were already at $3.1 billion of revenue in 2003 or something like that, 2003, 2004. And now they're at 3.4. So they're at 3.1 then, and now they're decade later, more than a decade later, they're only 3.4. They've done a miserable job of creating digital products. And I think part of it is because their mindset was still competing with other traditional products. And I know that Christensen told them that they should be thinking about more partnering opportunities. And I think that's where they failed the most. The chapter that I wrote kind of suggests that if Associated Press is a news provider for many of these newspapers, if Associated Press would create a new Facebook or new social medium on behalf of all the newspapers, it could do them all a lot of good. You could have links to all of their member newspapers from their social medium, their anti-Facebook medium. One of the biggest deals right now in America is this idea of fake news. The Associated Press could assure people that the news they saw, in fact, they could have a news feed. One thing that got me thinking about it was, I mentioned when I first started my career how they had the teletype, always typing in the background, and how when President Nixon had to resign, bing, 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 and all this noise going on because this teletype was going on. I know an award-winning journalist from that era said that I asked him why he was a journalist. And he said, basically, I think journalists are just born gossipers. And they like to be the first one to know something. They like to be show-offs. I know something you don't know. And I think maybe that is a little bit of that. I know something you don't know. I'm a journalist. And that was one of the exciting parts of having that teletype was that bing, 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 I get to know something you don't know. As I'd run to the teletype to read what it was, Nixon resigns. I know something that almost nobody else knew in those seconds, in those minutes before it hit everybody, before the media started broadcasting it. And so it hit me that, Associated Press could put their news, what they could do is put kind of like right now, you know what an RSS feed is? You know what RSS represents? It's actually, RSS stands for really simple syndication. So basically it is a news service. But what you do is on one of my websites, I don't have time to, one of my websites, I have RSS feeds from about a dozen different news sources on my website. But the way they do RSS feeds, at least the way these companies do it, is that they determine how much to give you. And so if you see a story from Fox on my website, you click on that story, you see like one paragraph, the headline in a paragraph. You click on it and it takes you to their website. If you see a story on my website from the New York Times, you see a headline in one paragraph. And you click on it, it takes you to the New York Times website. So basically I do the same thing if I were working for Associated Press. I'd say we need to do the same thing, except when they click on it, it will take it to your affiliate that is closest to where they live. And so if the newspaper I used to work for, if somebody from that city clicks on your social medium that is running the news but also letting people comment and discuss it and debate it, but if they click on news that you automatically put on everybody's news feed, if they click on it, they don't go to the Associated Press website. They go, if they live close to the Tri-City Herald, they go to the Tri-City Herald website to read that story. And so your member newspaper gets a feed from this Facebook type. I think in some ways it'd be better than Facebook. It could be better than Facebook. You still have all the comments. You still have people individualizing their site on this site, but part of their news stream is just as the news comes to Associated Press, it goes on automatically onto your news feed, so you can be the one that knows things first if you watch your news feed. Anyway, as I said, despite Christensen's attempts to help the newspapers, they didn't get it, and they haven't done anything with it. And from what I see, the TVs haven't either. It would take, in order to fight, by its very nature, once you recognize that you're being destroyed by Facebook and Google and other online operators, it almost dictates that you do something in a partnership way. The Tri-City Herald that I used to work for cannot do it by itself. It's not going to succeed. You can literally go on Facebook and take out an ad that will only be seen by people in the Tri-Cities, seen by people, those 200,000 or 300,000 people that live in that community where I'm from. You can tell Facebook only show them my advertising. So a local advertising can buy advertising on Facebook. And you click on that little ad on Facebook, and it'll take you to their website, and you can see if you're a grocery store. You can put a little ad in Facebook. Somebody in Facebook in that community will click on that, and it'll take them to their website, and they'll have every item in their grocery store listed there. And they could click on it and have their food ready for you when you got there, for example. And so, if anything, Facebook is going to make more inroads on the local community and more inroads in the local news media and the local market than in the future than it has in the past. A local grocery store may want to build on that. We're not going to buy big $2,000 ads in the local newspaper. We're going to put all of our advertising in Facebook and Twitter and in the social media, and we're going to drive them to our website. And our website, we're going to show them all of our products, organized very well. Here's the frozen vegetables, here's the frozen meat, here's this, make it very easy, very accessible, and they click on it, and we have people that will sack it for them. They come and they just pick up their groceries and leave, pay for them, or if they want to, we'll deliver it to them. Maybe even easier still. We don't have to have cash registers. They pay for it with a credit card. We deliver their food to them, and we have enough people. The economics work out on it. So if anything, they're going to face more challenges as they go forward than less if they don't figure out how to compete. And right now, they don't have a clue. Okay, we're past time. Thank you. Any questions, any thoughts? Our history got into our current well-being and into innovation and the nature of innovation and where and how, and like I say, I was kind of going back to the PowerPoint that was talking about And I wasn't sure whether it was agreeing or disagreeing with Christensen. But the ideas of Christensen help us to predict what will happen in the future. For example, who would guess right now that Google is ripe to be disrupted? Yeah, that was Christensen's, when they hired him to go talk to them, that was his message. I worry about you guys. You're ready to be disrupted because you're already too successful. So the very nature of innovation of any kind, but in the media included, is such that you have to now understand the process of innovation and the economics of innovation. And so, as I said, Google is trying to protect itself by breaking off all these new companies, saying, we own you, but we're not going to control you. You have to make it on your own, because they understand Christensen's principles. They understand the different mindset of an established company versus a hungry, disruptive company. One that is either going to sink or swim. That's a whole different mindset than a company that is established and making money, trying to make more profit. Different mindset. And so the same thing would be true for all the different media. And as I just said, he tried to help the newspapers. The newspapers could not be helped because they can't adapt their mindset. They are, the traditional media by their very nature, are used to being the big dog in their community. They're the big dog. They're the monopoly. The daily newspaper that I worked for was definitely a monopoly. I tried to go into business against them. And they used, I would say in some cases, illegal things to stop me. And as have others. I've been frequently in my career, I've been the David against Goliath. I've been the little guy against the monopoly. And so I've watched how they work. And in many cases, they do illegal things to stop a new competitor. But they don't understand with this new technology and the way that new innovations are coming into existence and so forth, the traditional media have no answer. They have no answer for it. So I think I myself could probably go back to that community where my previous attempt failed, partly because of my selection of manpower, my HR failings. I think now I could go back and disrupt them because I understand this better than they do. I understand how the world works now that they still don't understand. They think they're still caught in their own mindset. And they're losing money. They're doomed. But going right back to the idea I tried 10 years ago, more than 11 years ago, was monthly in print, daily online. Make that transition. Get people thinking purely the monthly in print is purely to drive them online. And so you basically are running the monthly in print as a marketing tool to get people online. Your main product's online. And so you operate totally differently than the Tri-City Herald, whose main product has always been in print. And they don't get much traffic to their website because they don't offer anything new on their website. Their website is not new and exciting. I mentioned in my book that all the traditional media should be offering video advertising. Video is the #1 form of advertising. Why can't a newspaper offer video advertising? There's no reason they can't. But newspapers don't think that way. Newspapers think we're a print medium. We offer print advertising. And now they made the transition. We offer virtual advertising. But they still think print virtual advertising. And they're not in the video advertising. Why not? It makes lots of money for TV stations. Why aren't they doing video advertising? There's a lot of other things. They're just blocking their thinking because the reason why they're failing is they're doing things the way they always did it. They're stuck in a certain mindset. And so they have to understand some of these dynamics in order to survive at all, and most of them almost certainly will not now. And so it definitely, the nature of innovation is such, if you want to succeed in this business, you need to understand disruption. In fact, you can be the disruptor. You can be the person that goes and for example, maybe you may not want to be in the grocery business, but maybe you find somebody who does want to be in the grocery business and you become their marketer because you understand the marketing. you understand that you can take out really cheap ads in social media, and you find out that, this, maybe Malaysia is split in their social media a little bit too much. I don't know. But in America, everybody's in Facebook. It's like 80% people in Facebook now. So if people are in Facebook, you can build an entire business around Facebook in that sort of community. And again, you can localize it exactly to your community. And by ad after ad after ad, you should load up on ads in social media with your local, being able to localize it with social media. But you need to, what is your product? And a perfect one would be a grocery store willing to deliver, a totally different mindset. That if they can get enough business, they can actually, by not having cashiers, by not having to have a public building, we can deliver at the same price or maybe even cheaper than you can go to the grocery store and spend your hour waiting, finding your stuff and waiting in line. We'll match the price and we will deliver to you. Because all your costs are down. Much lower cost, no public site. You can buy a cheap warehouse someplace. You do all your advertising in social media. Totally different mindset. And so, media, the very nature of media is so intertwined with all of the economy. It has been, the success of traditional media has been the success of the economy, and vice versa, because they've had a monopoly that has been the driving force for all businesses who wanted to succeed had to go through the traditional media. If they didn't go to the traditional media, they could not succeed. And so they had to pay the prices of the traditional media. And so the traditional media thrived with their monopolies. But now that whole paradigm is broken, because now they don't need the traditional media anymore. Now, even on the local basis, and I think most businesses do not understand this. And again, in this part of the world, maybe it's not strong enough yet. I don't know. Or maybe it's too divided between different social media. But in America, definitely, Facebook and Twitter own the market right now. And so someplace like America, you can build your entire marketing plan around social media now. Social media in conjunction with your website. You have a brilliant website and build everything, get everybody to drive them to your website with social media, and you can build a very successful business based on that. So it's the future of media as it intertwines with all other aspects. Like I say, in studying newspapers and studying TV, all of that I tried to explain to you before, you had to look at them through the paradigm of economics. They were all developed before they knew how to make money. And then they gradually figured out the paradigm or the formula for making money. Right now we're in a great transition period where you guys are the future of the media. And you have to understand the economics, and you have to understand the nature of innovation, which Christensen is trying to explain to us. One of the things that did help me in some of my successful news products was understanding that one of the ways that would make me successful was if I were a consultant, if I acted like a consultant to my advertisers. And most of the media was just selling ads. And so when I created, I think I shared with the idea of this campaign plan I shared with my advertisers. That was successful because it got them thinking like campaigners. They weren't just buying one ad at a time. But now, because I offer them at a cheaper rate an entire campaign plan, they started thinking how to campaign. And then it freed me up. I didn't have to waste my time reselling them every week because they signed a year-long contract. Now I could spend my time servicing them and helping them become better advertisers. And so it changed their mindset, and it changed my mindset too, in a sense. It changed my services. I became a service-oriented company rather than a sales-oriented company because I had already pre-sold them. Now I could serve. And so when you look at media, you cannot ignore economics. You cannot ignore, and look at innovation, you cannot ignore the economics. All of it is tied up. There is no, when you look at this idea of that Poe was talking about, that you need that now the demand drives the production. Well, that's true, but you have to produce it before you can create the demand. You have to innovate it, and you have to market it. Now you create the demand, and now you produce it. And now you can create it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper by mass production. But you have to create it first. You have to have an idea this is marketable. You create it. You have to market it. You create the demand. Now you can mass produce it and make money from it. That has to be the process. So, right in all of that, the media is involved with all of that. Because the media, whether social media or traditional media, is the one that's doing the marketing for you. And so within the entire economy, whatever you want to look at, the media is right in the middle of it. It has to be. Because the media does the marketing for you. So whatever, again, it might be social media, but media it is. Some kind of media. Okay, now we're way over time. Any other questions? I can talk as long as you can ask questions, you know that. Okay, thank you.